So we had ended up talking about market niche strategies. And the question is basically what kind of ideas can we have as being a niche? Well, there's several niche specialist roles, and I'm not going to go over a great number of them. Certainly a geographic specialist is one that we have here up in the high country. Quite simply, it's very interesting. A lot of our things that go on in and around this is very similar to island strategies because we are, very much cut off and we require, driving from distances. So that helps. Customer size specialists are for those individuals who can focus on 5 individuals or less. That would be an example, or even more into the 30s and 40 ranges. Vertical line specialists would be a corporation or a niche strategy that literally supports an individual from the cradle to the grave. And so what I would mean if I were looking at a computer system as an example, there's a banking system that's known as Jack Henry. Jack Henry is the banking software from banks as small as 25 million up to 3.5 billion. And they have that unique specialty there. And so you wouldn't, a bank that's $3 billion, you would be surprised for me calling that a niche. And yet I'm telling you that it is, all right? And so those are what I would consider to be niche strategies that kind of put everything into perspective. All right. So we have the leaders, the challengers, the followers, and the niches. All right. So along with those sizes as ways of understanding strategy, we also have to understand that items or particular industries go through a lifespan very much similar to a human being. And so let me first do this. And this article in 1983, if I'm not mistaken, by George Day, is considered a pretty seminal article. And this is on the concept of that products have a lifespan very much like human beings do, all right? And so what Day said basically is that industries, it's important to understand that the product life cycle has to concern itself with product categories, not particular individual products, is basically that products go through a life cycle or a life stage. And he came up with this concept. Once again, it was a thought process that he came up with that basically states that products have their own lifespan from beginning to end. And he called this the product life cycle. And the product life cycle is one of those strategies that's shared again and again and again. So what does it say? Okay. When cell phones came out, there was a substantial amount of research and development that was required in order to bring them to market. A lot of research in terms of those particular items that consumers would desire more than others. You also found that they needed to test what is the ideal sizes, many of things like that. And so what you had basically is this beginning stage known as the introduction. Generally during the introduction, you're going to find that this particular stage is the one where you first have to recapture all of your initial costs. Usually the introduction is led by one corporation who has what we call first mover advantage. And what you'll see is that other corporations are anticipating that move, but usually one company steps out first. In the introduction stage, what you find is, as I talked about with this, discontinuous innovations, is that there's a lot of education for the consumer. And that is the primary focus of integrated marketing communications. Education about what the item is, how to use it, how to be able to maximize it. And that's where the introductions goes. The growth stage is the most rapid of all, even though this curve doesn't look like it. The growth stage is where the entire market expands. So regardless the number of players that there are in a particular market, as individuals come in, as the first movers basically have substantiated the market, you find hangers on. You find the clominers and the imitators and the adapters are now starting to bring their items into the market. And the first mover advantage still has the advantage, even though their share is starting to drop. Instead of having 100% of the market, they may collapse down to 20%. But the fact is that the entire market is growing. So in essence, their profits are growing as well. This is also the time, and I don't like the way they do this. This line should be about over here somewhere, okay? I don't know how they drew that up, because the maximum amount of profit usually happens in the growth stage, okay? What you also start seeing in the growth stage is you see modifications of the original existing item. So what you'll start seeing is additions like minor continuous innovations happen. Better cameras, 3 cameras, front cameras and back cameras. You start to see the variations on the theme, and the reason why, excuse me, is that first mover now needs to differentiate themselves from the other competitors. There's probably nobody who does this better than me, by the way, than Samsung. Samsung has a series of constant continuous innovations that come through that basically keep most of the others off balance. They're coming out with their foldable or bendable one. It's already kind of out in the market, and they've already got an update on that. And that's their way of being able to go through it. I personally like LG phones, and LG's out of the market. So it means I got to go to Samsung. Well, that's life. And the reason why, and the honest is that the cell phone industry is now in the maturing phase, all right? The maturing phase basically happens when the total number of sales in the industry peaks. Doesn't mean, excuse me, that you don't have new customers. That's not what it means. It's just that the overall market has achieved probably its maximum effect. What you also see is that the lesser partners in that group have started to drop out. They can't run with the hounds. They don't have that ability, excuse me, to constantly stay up. And so what happens basically is they find their ways of being able to slowly get out of the market. What you see in advertising from growth to maturity phase is there will be more talks about reminder advertising, remembering that they're there in the market, and they'll talk about the minor continuous innovations that are happening at the same time. In the maturity phase, you have reminder advertising happening as well, but what you also have is you have the leaders, whoever they are, out there trying to grab market share from the competitors, because now there is no more market out there that's constantly growing. They need to go find, in essence, where those individuals are and take as much of it as they can. The last phase is the decline phase, and this is where the market, in essence, no longer is a rising market, but one that is simply, hopefully, trying to sustain itself. You'll find also that there'd be very few players left, but those players that are left, you're certainly willing to stay into that industry, especially if the industry is profitable. I mean, why get out? How many advertisements have you seen other than the company for staplers? Never. But is Swingline ever going to get out? Is Bosch ever going to get out? No, because they still have profit. You know, these items are what we call cash cows. These bring in steady incomes. They require very little upkeep, practically no advertising, but through seasonal reasons, you have school or whatever, they will be sold again and again and again, and there's no reason other than that they would simply drop out of the business to get out, okay? So this is the short version of everything about the product lifecycle. Now, when George Day came up with this concept, and it's kind of like the same thing about the concept of innovation, The question that you kind of ask yourself, have they ever actually taken this theory and done research on it? Does it exist? Does the product life cycle have an existence when you study it? Well, the answer is one of those great answers that keeps you doing research for the rest of your life. Yes and no, all right? Certain industries do not substantiate themselves in the product life cycle. Some of them are over in a second. You know, like some industries come and go almost completely overnight. I think what you're seeing in the non-fungible token area right now is where you had this enormous bump and now everything's going low again. I have my own reasons why I think it's happening that way, but this is an example. I mean, not everything is a smooth kind of pattern. So why do we study it? And once again, it's the same answer that Dr. Babin gave me in the PhD class, because it's useful. It is useful. It can't predict what's going to happen, but it helps you to be able to plan. And it gives you a focus and the ability to be able to plan your advertisements, think about your innovations, and prepare for the futures, because those futures do happen. The decline stage does not necessarily mean death. That's an important thing to know. And there are two definitions, obsolete and obsolescent, and there are substantial differences that you need to know. So what is something that is obsolete? An item that is obsolete has no practical uses. An example is hunting whales to get whale bones for corsets. That would be an example. Obsolescence basically state that this item is a perfectly functioning item, but that something has come along that is just simply better. And that's what obsolescence means, all right? And it's key for you to understand the differences. Because you know what? Obsolescent items still can be useful. And sometimes you can find the technology from an obsolescent item and use it again. Did you know, by the way, Nokia re-released their little 5150, the little phone that they used to have that had the snake on it and everything like that? And the phone, by the way, is popular in Europe for one reason. The battery life on it is 30 days now. Okay, so if you need a phone just for texting and for phones, it's still perfectly useful, but you won't find it in its uses for today. Yes.
I have a question. So going back to the maturity stage, you said that that's when they're trying to get out of the market.
Many companies are finding their way out. That's correct. In other words, the entire sales of that industry has peaked. Yes.
But then you said that like cell phones are an example of that, but cell phones are not going. What do you mean by getting out?
Well, LG is a classic example. All right. LG is for 3 years, LG was the #1 electronics manufacturer in the world. All right. They're #1 corporation. But the fact is that LG found it simply not profitable to stay in the cell phone industry, where they don't have continuing increasing sales to be able to substantiate their research, okay? And so that's an example of a corporation in the mature phase. And this is that concept of proactive anticipation, all right? You're seeing that the market is coming up in the future, and in order to head that off and to stop yourself from making substantial losses, you're finding your way out, all right? That would be the difference. If they were going to be doing it in the decline stage, it would be basically a fire sale where they're just trying to get out and make whatever profit they can. If you remember yesterday, I talked about IBM getting out of the desktop environment and then the laptop environment. IBM saw this, okay? They could see the desktop sales were cresting and laptop sales as well. And they came up with this 10-year plan where they were going to divest themselves entirely at a profit. And that's what they did. And that's what proactive anticipation is. It's the, you can't predict everything, all right? You know, if there was another boom cycle, they may have felt like they were taking a bath, but you're able to plan for it in a way that the decline stage basically is you've used up too much of your money, and now you got to find your way out. The tragic thing for me is that there are many corporations, you may not know of them, service merchandising, of course, Kmart and Sears or other ones, that if they could have lasted a little longer, if they could have found a way to make it, they'd be quite profitable right now, but they simply couldn't survive. Service merchandising is an interesting corporation. They came up with the idea of only having one model on the floor. You had a list and you would write down the items that you want. You would go to the cashier and they would cash it in, and those goods would come to you on a belt on your way out the door. And it was really a good idea, but the problem is that the technology couldn't substantiate it in the 80s, and so it went out. Okay. So did that help to explain? Yeah. The smart ones are getting out in the mature phase. The declines, maybe not much.
Is divesting the same thing as contraction?
Well, it can be one or two things, and we'll talk about both of those. But to go ahead, contraction is the willingness for you to limit yourself to the number of lines that you still have existing, okay? Cut all of your research and development, no longer advertise it, take those resources and use it for something else, and just run that string along as long as you can. That would be contraction. Divesting means quite simply, I do no longer want this item, and if I can sell it to another corporation, I can, or else I'm just getting out. Divesting means I'm gone, I'm out of here. And so Oxidol is the example if you use Procter & Gamble. All right, you bet. So now that I've talked all about this, we're going to do these slides one at a time. And I also kind of wanted to talk about that not everything is perfect, okay? And that what happens many times is that you'll have this growth and the slump and then maturity pattern where basically things just bump along in a continuous state and never get out of it. I think if you look at the internal combustion engine, at this point, I see nothing that can replace it, all right? Quite simply because the performance and the heat signature that comes from an internal combustion engine is simply too strong and powerful to be circumvented by electric batteries at the moment, all right? What I'm looking for is some kind of, there's a concept known as dry lithium, all right? Wet lithium is what powers our batteries now, but the problem with wet lithium is that it has to be in such a pure state that it's very difficult to try to be able to produce. Dry lithium is what Toyota's working on. And dry lithium is a dry battery that remains constant and fixed, and I haven't seen anything like that. So if you look at the internal combustion engine, I see this growth and slump, and I see it bumping along like this for many, many times. And I think of diesel engines. Diesel engines have been around since the 1890s, using the impurities in fuel, the stuff that's left over. And I haven't seen the deal breaker for that yet, so I would expect that. You also see this cycle-recycle pattern that happens many times, and this is when a particular item finds a brand new use that they may not have considered before. And so baking soda was this for many years. So baking soda was used not only for baking, but it was also used for cleaning teeth, cleaning houses. And then pretty soon in the 50s, what you found is Arm & Hammer came up with the idea of putting it in your refrigerator and make sure you replace it every year. And so this is the cycle-recycle pattern that goes on and on. Finally, the scallop pattern is where an existing product continually finds some new use and has a new growth over and over again. And without getting into too much of this, I can think of the redesign of skateboards. I mean, skateboards were around when I was a kid, a long time ago, but you see this kind of same scallop pattern happening where you have growth, maturity, growth, maturity, growth, maturity. And this happens basically generationally when a group takes something into themselves as their own. And so that's how the scallop pattern works. What this all basically means is that the product life cycle, although it is substantially tested, the old question is, you never know, all right? Can you find a substantial use for an existing product? And the answer that I give to that is that when it is a general product, and I don't even know how to explain this, if a product is designed for an absolute specific use, then very rarely will you see these cycle patterns happen. But if if an item is a camera, all right, a camera has uses no matter how many ways you have it, unless they run out of 50mm film. That would be, if the product is generalizable, then you can have many of these patterns. So, along with this, we got to think of fad, fashion, and style. So what is the differences? Well, a style is a universal kind of, I don't want to call it a function, but it is a universal design that in many ways never goes out. So a style is a way of wearing your clothes. The ubiquitous blue jeans and t-shirt has been around since the 30s, all right? And jeans have been around since the 1880s for different uses. And you find jeans and a white t-shirt going in and out of style over and over again. And by what I mean by that is that sometimes style is fashion and sometimes it's not, but it never goes out. And that's what a style is. There will always be room for jeans and a white t-shirt. A fashion is a style of the day. And fashions can go in and out. And the interesting thing is that a style can be a fashion for some time, go away, and then come back. So I'm going to mess this up. Culottes for girls, or ladies, forgive me, is a style that was around in the 70s. And it has come in and out of style again and again, over and over again. And that would be an example. A fad is basically any item or any fashion that has a meteoric rise and an immediate meteoric downfall. Fads are one of those things that are nearly impossible to being able to make substantial pieces of money on, but every once in a while you can. So the guy who came up with the pet rock, in the 70s, this was a marketing person, and they were out of business. He was nearly bankrupt, and he was coming up with an idea, and he came up with an idea called the pet rock. And so it was a rock inside of a box, and it had grass in it, and it had air holes in it. I'm not kidding. And you would get along with it a little thing that talked about how to take care of your pet rock. And it became a fad in the 70s for about 4 to 6 months, and then it exploded. And just about the time that it was dying, he came up with a concept of the pet rock cemetery. So if you sent your rock back, paying him money, he would put it in a cemetery, give it a little headstone, and bury your pet rock. That's a fact, all right? So one of the corporation that I would say, if any, I'm sure you all know more than I do, Hot Topic. Hot Topic is one of those amazing, rare corporations that has been able to make money off of a fad because their lead time has been reduced to 4 months to less than 3 weeks. So when it comes to fads, they can produce an item, get it out on the shelves. It becomes a fad and hits the dollar bins overnight. And they're able to make money off of that. There are few corporations that can't, so I give them credit. So style, fashion, fad. So why do you want to be the firstest with the mostest? One of the things that happened when Apple came out with the iPad is that they defined what a tablet is supposed to be. A tablet is supposed to have a touch screen. A tablet is supposed to have a very good video. A tablet is supposed to have an internet connection. It has to have buttons in one way or another to control it. It requires a username and password. And it requires programs to be run on it called apps. One of the things that a pioneering does is that you establish the product attributes, the class attributes. And for those items that do not meet that standard, well, those items are already behind the times. When I say iPad, Apple is with it. It is ubiquitous. And that the recall of the brand name is absolute. Not only that, but when it pushes out there, consumers find them, start making creative uses of them, and that they capture more uses in the middle of the market that may not have been thought about. One of the, I don't want to say least talked about, but one of the uses for iPads that is not as bold is where it has been in the healthcare system. I mean, for remote monitoring, the Apple has been a godsend. It means that like a heart specialist can monitor 25 to 30 individuals in a hospital, all from their own desk. That is one of those things that happens. Now, the drawbacks are is that sometimes imitators can surpass the innovators. This is what Compaq did. When Compaq came out with the 8086 processor, they were able to charge 30% more for their PCs than IBM, and they got it, all right? So that's an example. The next is that once you lose leadership, it's very rarely regained. And while Apple is very happy to have their particular section of the iPad market, it is safe to say that Android as an operating system has done a significant amount of damage to the iOS, operating platforms. They've been able to take that over. Having said that, Apple wouldn't trade where they are for the world. It would have been interesting. I have no idea where the iPad would be if Microsoft would come out first. I don't know where Microsoft would be. I really don't. It's one of those maybes in the future that we can spend a lot of time. It's a good beer conversation if you're in a marketing league kind of way. We talk about these things all the time. I don't know. I really don't know. But I know this. I think Microsoft would be substantially stronger than where they are now. I like the Surface very much, but I'm very happy with my Lenovo. Okay, so these are the introduction stage. So this is kind of a busy slide, and I don't want you to get too wrapped up in this. But basically what this says is that I come out with one product and I'm in a given market. The first thing or the thing that I want to do in expansion is move to another market as quickly as I can. I want to be able to take that existing product and be able to put that in other territories as fast as possible. And as I move from market to market to market, what will happen is that there will be substantial differences or uniqueness that consumers have desired. And so what happens is I'll come up with a second product. And so if you look at the iPad and its history, they had the next innovations come out. Then they had the iPad Air. They had the iPad Mini. They had them in different sizes, one after the other, and now with detachable keyboards. And so what this basically means is in the expansion phase, you want to push out into as many markets and as many new products as you possibly can, because this is where profit is growing the most rapid. That's basically what this means. So what are the things that you can do? So we've already talked about some of them. Some of the things that you try to do is you can improve quality or add new features. You try to come up with new markets. Not only do you add more things to a given product, but you might take away a few things and make it a singular, smaller product. You can do that as well. You try to enter into new market segments, into individuals that you may not have thought of. And this is certainly what happened in the healthcare industry when the iPad moved in. You can increase your distribution, enter into new distribution channels. And of course, this is where the omni-channel has created a whole new life for itself. And as I said before, in the introduction stage, you go in awareness and trial. I should say, and I did mention, the most important thing in the introduction stage is trial. Getting your consumers to try your product in whatever way possible. And when you go from the introduction stage where you're trying to get them, you go from the introduction stage to the growth and maturity stage where you're talking about brand loyalty. The sureness, the visceral happiness you have by staying with that particular brand. And so when you start to see this shift, this is also the point where your consumers are starting to buy their second or their third item as well. And then, of course, what ultimately happens also is lower prices are one of those things, because eventually price sensitivity happens. And the number one way price sensitivity happens is when consumers can no longer detect differences between your products and the others. And when consumers do not see that your products are any different, they only choose one way: price. We all do. Trial communications. When Gain came out, Gain detergent was the first liquid laundry detergent in the market. So when laundry detergent came out when I was a kid, it was in large boxes like this big. I'm not kidding, okay? And they had things in them to help them to clean clothes known as phosphates. So what are phosphates? Phosphates is phosphorus, okay? And anybody knows with phosphorus, it combines with water and creates heat. I mean, that's why you had phosphates in laundry detergent. Well, around the 60s, somebody decided maybe it's not a good thing to be dumping all these phosphates into our environment. And so what they did was they had to make changes in the formulas for laundry detergent. Well, around this time, Procter & Gamble decided to come up with a liquid laundry detergent. But the problem with liquid laundry detergent was that there was a perception that liquid detergent was used for only one thing, and what was it? Not washing clothes, washing dishes. Exactly. All right. So the perception in the consumer mind is that this is detergent for washing my dishes, not my clothes. And so what Gain did when they came out with their liquid, I remember this, it was in the late 70s. So Gain pioneered, or they connected with newspapers across the United States, because newspapers had the largest subscriptions of individuals at houses in the United States. It was something around 160 million. Now, they send out 65 million two-use samples of Gain laundry. I remember Gain laundry detergent, and ask you to do 2 washes. Now, there's a reason why it was only 2 washes, all right? It gave you a chance to use it. But another thing is that in completion terms, we think in terms of 3s, all right? And so 2 washes is not enough for individuals. They got him into the trial phase, and from that time on, gain has never been less than number 3. And all detergent went from solid to liquid laundry detergent. All right. So that's one of those things in the trial phase where it not only bled success, but it started to change. And yes, you think of that pattern, it changed the way things are done. Okay. All right. Growth phase. So in the mature phase, there's a couple of things. Yeah.
Would a flanker product be like the iPhone Plus, like they make the iPhone and then they give the Plus?
Yes.
Same thing, it's a little bit different.
Exactly. Yes, it is. And anything with a slight variation in that, which is more specific to a given item, is exactly that. That's correct. I would even say that the watch is a flanker product as well, because the watch is one of those unique items that is in the Apple product line that truthfully did not have any functional connection with the rest of it. But they brought it out there. It hasn't been as successful as they want, but it's still, a product item that people have. Okay. Yeah, good question. So in the maturity phases, you have multiple things that happen. The market is modified into itself. You find the individuals who are the major leaders into the market are no longer there, and this market's in a mature phase. So you find individuals who haven't necessarily moved on to the next best thing. So if those individuals are in the environment, then what you do is you step back and you might even change the products that you have now. My dad, till the day he died, shaved with a single-edged razor, and there was no way to convince him otherwise. And so a product modification is actually many times can be a step back, only to those particular items or benefits that the consumers consider to be important. My dad didn't want a cell phone, he didn't want a phone that could browse the internet. It was too much for him. He couldn't understand it. He just wanted a phone. He didn't want text messaging. That's another example. And so even what they call it, jitterbugs was too much for him, just to give you an idea. So, products modify themselves to be able to fit the existing market as it is, as it's coming along. All right. So these are some of the ways that markets get modified. You tend to convert users. All right. You try to enter into new segments and take your item and push them into other directions. Let me also say that Starbucks has done this excellently by taking themselves out of just their own stores and putting themselves into supermarkets and even auto sales, which I think is just crazy. All right. And I should have also mentioned this. Tums is an acid, but it's a calcium supplement. My dad took Tums every day, not because his stomach was upset, but he needed it for calcium. It sounds crazy, but there are many items like that. Aspirin, 82 milligram aspirin. Aspirin, basically what it does is it adds oxygen into your blood system. And so you find aspirin that way. These are examples of how you modify the market and you try to increase sales volume. So the last thing to talk about, we were talking about this contraction, and I'm putting that also in the concept of harvesting and divesting. Okay. So period water is one of those interesting things. It was one of the hottest items that when I was growing up in the 70s, everybody wanted period water. So what is period water? It's basically carbonated water, hard water, you say mineral water, and it's bottled in France. Because of that, there was a scare in the 2000s that Perrier water, I have a cousin named Perrier. Because of the fact that it came from deep underground, there was this concerned that it was radioactive. So naturally occurring radiation happens under 1,000 feet. It's radon, it's one of those things. And Perrier spent too much time ignoring what they were telling him. People got upset and they got worried. Finally, Perrier, after 3 months, came out with a study that said that there is no radon in Perrier. But guess what? Perrier went under as a corporation and Cadbury bought it. So that's an example, all right, of what happens. So in the decline stage, you have to basically think what items are going to survive and what items are not. Swingline and Bosch, to their credit, decided that they were going to keep staplers and they were going to harvest them. And more accurately to say harvesting is when you take away research, you take away advertising, you take away every single penny of support from that particular item, and you shift it to other items that can make you more money, or that by their sheer demand require more money. And you let that particular product sink or swim. Well, what happens many times is that the product, as long as it has a viable market, will do just fine. Keep going, never a problem. You know how long staples have been around? 1846, okay? Staples have been around for nearly 200 years, and they'll never go away. As a matter of fact, they find more uses of it. I had 4 staples in my hip, or 6, all right? And the most pain I had when I had my hip surgery was when they took them out. Ow. I mean, I needed a shot for the shot. Anyway, so harvesting. Divesting is when you decide that you no longer want to be in that market. This is not proactive anticipation. This is in the decline phase, and you simply got to get out and you say that the market is no longer sustainable for that particular item. And this is what Procter & Gamble did for Oxidol. Now, the strange thing is Oxidol's fine. Oxidol is being bought as a flagship for another corporation. And I can't remember the other things that are in that company. They're kind of like the second tier down of products, and they don't do any of the other fancy things that P&G does with their stuff, but it sells. And the crazy thing is, why pull the plug on something that's making money? And that's the good point about it. So, gives you an idea of how to work through these phases and think about these items when the industry, not the product, but when the industry is in these particular 4 levels. So what do you do in a slow economy? Well, we're talking about where we are right now. Well, there are some things you can do. From every problem, there comes opportunity. It just depends on how you do it. Think of it. You might explore the idea of increasing your investment. While your competitors are weak, maybe you can grab enough market share from the rest of them to take them out, and you become the cash cow in that group. That's possible. The next thing always is stay close to your customer base. Remember, relationship marketing means that your customers are always yours, and you wish them to come back again and again and again. Go back over your budget. You may have written your budgets years ago when you were in the introduction and the growth phase, and you have money allocated to resources that you no longer need to. Return to your roots. What is the number one thing your particular product does? If I were to say Volvo, my generation would say safety. We would remember that. It's stamped in the uniqueness of its characteristic. Harley-Davidson, ruggedness, individualism. Interesting thing about Harley-Davidson, the average owner of a Harley-Davidson makes anywhere from $75,000 to $186,000 a year. They tend to be doctors, lawyers, all kinds of individuals but they put on the persona when they put on that leather jacket, all right? So retool your value proposition and then fine tune the brand and offerings. Go back and see, you might eliminate something. Remember that addition can come from by subtraction. Taking out something, you might actually augment its use. So one of the unique things about Arm & Hammer baking soda now is it's actually got the panel cut out so that all you have to do is open it. You don't have to dig in it with a knife to open it up to be able to use the refrigerator. That's a way of making it work. In a slow growth economy, there are always possibilities if you're looking properly. And we're finished with that chapter. Okay, the next section of this class, we're going to be doing some group work. I'm going to talk about the steps that we go through for being able to do our case analysis. We're going to talk a little bit about the SWOT analysis. We've already done SWOTs. I know you've seen videos on them. And we're going to take an actual article, and I want you to get into your groups, and we're going to do a SWOT analysis with that. We're going to talk about it. Okay, so this is like pre-case stuff that we're going to do. So let's take about 10 minutes, and we'll be back at about 12:37. Six point five. 6.25, right. You're right.
You know what it is.
13 laps.
Right.
Yeah, 5K is 13 laps on a regulation field. I used to do that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Way back when I had legs. And I had to get
Yeah, I ran track here.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Awesome. So what's your time?
How much again?
10K.
10K is around 31 minutes. 5K is 14:40.
Beat me by about 20 minutes. Good for you. All right. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to get into our groups. And what I want you to do is to do a SWOT analysis. And we're going to talk about how you go about preparing to put together your case and the way that you should think. All right. One of the things, or what we're hoping to do is to help you to analyze everyday occurrences that you see and be able to bring the facts together and create some kind of framework to be able to understand and be able to fix a problem, all right, or at least provide suggestions. So a framework is comprehensive. Hopefully what you do is be able to look at all of the facts and evidence that you're given and come up with rational ideas about what's causing it. And many times it takes a little bit of time for you to be able to do this, and that's fine, because the way that you do that is you do it through practice. And that's why we're here in this class, to practice this, okay? So just to go over some of the basics, okay? No, first off, and of course you're going to do it here because we don't have enough time to do it. But the first thing is you can never analyze a case reading it one time or just doing the analysis in the first reading. My recommendation for you is that when you start working on the cases, to be able to go through and read it in a narrative format, if possible, all right? The second time you read it, I urge you to get a yellow highlighter and a pencil and whatever you use. And when you see a substantial fact, underline those particular items and that will help you to start to disseminate the problems. The second is, don't get trapped into thinking that there's a single answer for the case that is hidden in the text. There are many times that there are things that are appropriate to a given situation that if you just change the situation, things are different, okay? Another thing basically to realize, or the best thing is to put yourself in the shoes of the decision makers. So when you analyze this case, I want you to think of yourself as the rainmakers. You're coming into a corporation that has an issue. They need some kind of enlightenment. You're the outside individuals. You're coming in and you're telling these individuals where to be able to find the issues and where are they coming from. So in any situation analysis, it's the thorough use of the SWOT analysis that helps. And so to briefly go over what the SWOT analysis, again, it was developed in the 60s by a Stanford University economist whose name escapes me. And basically what a SWOT analysis is quite simply, it's the strengths, it's the weaknesses, it's the opportunities, and it's the threats. Now, when you look at a SWOT analysis, realize these are internal and they are micro in economics, and these are external and they are macro in economics. How do you tell whether or not something is a threat or a weakness? You can tell whether it's a threat or weakness if you have anything that you can do to fix it, all right? So a current recession, there's nothing that you can do to be able to fix that problem. If you have problems with personnel, that's a weakness and that is fixable within your level, all right? So how do you draw SWOT analysis? There's many ways of doing it, but the simplest way is to do a 2x2 frame like this. Okay, and you can have the strengths and weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats like that, and you just list them. Now, what you're hoping to do is that where these opportunities are, what you're hoping to do is find a way of turning them into strength, to be able to take the opportunities with the resources and materials that you have and use them to your advantage. Realize this, all of this is within the context of your organizations. Your organizations are the ones that are driving and determining whether you can do this in success. If it is a threat, what I hope to do is be able to minimize the threat based upon the strength that I have so that it does not turn into a weakness. And so these are some of the ways to think of this, okay? So the best way of doing it is to jump into it. So this is an article, I took Business Week for a decade. And this is an article in 2014. This is not modified in any way. The article is about a real event. And what I'm going to want you to do is I'll put up your groups. And so during the second part of the class, I want you to pick out the pertinent facts in this. And after we pick up the pertinent facts, we're going to put together a SWOT analysis that you develop as a team, and we're going to try to determine where the issues are. So let me do this. Let me bring up the teams. And these are the groups that we have now. And I'm sorry, I'm not in anybody's team, but you know. So I want you to do this. I want you to find who's in your group, get together in your group. I want you to exchange emails with each other. If you haven't introduced yourselves, please do. I want you to read this separately as a group. I want you to get together and create a SWOT analysis. And we're going to do this in about 30 minutes, take about 30 minutes to do all of this. We get together and we'll talk it out. Okay? Go.
What we do is separately do our own little. I think it's general
Okay.
business strategy.
And what's the difference?
So it's basically like a lifestyle magazine. Just showing people like interior decorating, here's how to do this with your house. It's like a lot of human-centered stuff.
So your whole business is a magazine?
I don't know if that's their primary business. Like it says, most of what they make money on is selling kind of spots. That's pretty fun. Okay.
So
And
So just to give you an idea of what I do, everybody has their own kind of way, but I usually go through with a yellow highlighter, and I also use a pencil if I think it's significant. And I grab what I think are significant pieces, and many times I'll have other group members who'll grab something that I didn't, and that's good because we all think in different ways. So these are some of the things that I thought were important. So I'm going to go to groups one at a time, and I'm going to ask for some significant facts or what you wrote down, and then we'll make our own collective SWOT. Okay, so first group, give me a strength.
income from merchandise licensing.
MSLO, yes. Merch, very good. Yeah, I mean, it's continuing, it's constant, it is kind of amazing. So give me a weakness.
The culture of the company is resistant to change.
Culture resistant to change, that's a good one. Okay. So give me an opportunity.
We said the opportunity for overseas expansion and also expansion to other demographic groups.
Overseas expansion. And then market growth. Give me a threat.
The micro advisors online.
Micro advisors, yes. Good. Give me a weakness.
They have a bad reputation from all their legal
Bad
issues.
reputation. And where does the bad reputation come from? What happened?
They didn't go through with their contract with Macy's.
Yes,
They would break
and
it,
why?
because they thought that JC, something about their products.
Yeah. It came down to is that Macy's felt like they bought something that somebody else had already bought. Okay, they were buying an exclusivity when MSLO, in essence, sold it twice. And so there's that bad reputation underlies another factor that is going on inside the business. So good one. Give me a weakness.
Extreme turnover with all the employees.
Extreme turnover. I mean, extreme. How bad is it?
Pretty bad, I guess.
How bad is it when you can't find a CEO for 8 months? I mean, how bad is that? Okay. I mean, CEOs, I mean, come on. What happened to the last CEO that they had? Who was it? I think it's on page 2. Let's see.
Walked out after 5 months.
After 5 months, and who was it?
Lisa Gersh.
Lisa Gersh, who developed Oxygen Channel. I mean, you have an all-star player who after 5 months throws her hands up and says, I'm out of here. I mean, that's crazy. Give me a strength.
Brand recognition.
Brand recognition, yes. The Martha Stewart brand is just crazy. It is. Give me a threat.
I think the online influencers.
Online influencers, micro advisors,
Yeah.
it's true. What else is a threat out there? Also,
Future legal disputes.
yeah, future legal disputes, legal problems. Okay, anybody want to add anything else? Just throw anything out there.
Is there like competition of people that are similar to Martha Stewart by trying to do the same thing that she does?
Multiple competitions, right? Okay, anything else? Any strength, weakness, anything you want to add?
Probably depending on your opinion of Martha, them not really having a clear path about, faces of the franchise after her departure is probably on more the weakness side.
No clear path to the future. That's a good one. Okay. Yes,
We had a, I don't know the contact last name. No, Daniel.
dates or something. I can't pronounce it either.
So we had it at the strength. We feel like it's like different mindset. when he goes to the company.
Different mindset, yes. They said about him, he's got sharp elbows. So hopefully he'll bring a breath of fresh air. Yes,
What does someone having sharp elbows mean?
okay, that's a good question. Having sharp elbows means that you're willing to negotiate and you're willing to negotiate for the best interest of your corporation. Let me tell you folks, if you have not taken a negotiation class, I would urge you to do it. I'm not a good one, all right? And I'm just telling you that. But sharp elbows means that you're going to go out there and look out for the best interests of your corporation, no matter how many feelings you hurt. Now, having said that, there is a way to negotiate so that everybody can win if you do it in a proper format, all right? And I'm not the person to talk about, but if you go into industrial organizational psychology, into leadership classes, you can learn. But sharp elbows mean that, all right? I'm not taking that deal. You're going to have to drop it by 10%. Sorry, I'm out of here. That's the kind of thing that it has. If you ever seen the Shark Tank or any of that, those are sharp elbows out there. That's what it means, okay? Okay, anything else? Anything else you want to add? Well, good. So we got a good list here. So we've got strengths. We see that it's a strong brand. It's a unique mindset. You know, the weaknesses, it's, you know, they've got a bad reputation. They have a difficulty. They're resistant to change. There's extreme turnover, which feeds on this resistance to change, because Lisa Gersh couldn't come in and make this any better. There's no clear path to the future. There is a possibility of overseas expansion, and yet there is this problem of these micro advisors, these influencers that are out there that they're really having an issue with. Okay, so with all of this, what's the problem with Martha Stewart? Yes. Well, I won't say that, but I will say that because I'm too close. The problem with Martha Stewart is Martha Stewart. Okay, I mean, that's quite the answer, all right? How do you know? Well, when they talk about her daughter, what was she doing?
She quit.
She was like an advisor for young people. How old was she? 47. How does she relate? Okay. It kind of gives you an idea of the stigmatism in their minds, the difficulty that Martha Stewart has, the resistance to change. How much does a weekend driver make? I want that. Okay. I want to work 3 days a week and go 6 figures. Okay. That's my job. That's the way I want to go. Anyway, all of this leads up, and you can see when you put all of these things together, you can get a pretty good idea, a coalescence and an understanding of where the issues evolve. All right. We're dealing with a corporate culture that is not only resistance to change, but can find no pathway out. You find individuals that are within the organization that they call friends of Martha, that quite simply are what we call feather bedding. You ever heard what that phrase is? Feather bedding is quite simply you're feathering your own nest and you don't really care about what's going on outside, okay? The fact is that you had this gigantic conglomerate that was making $2 billion shrink down to 96 million and has all of these problems. And these problems basically have to do with the way the organizations were set up from the beginning and the inability to see far enough into the future to be able to embrace and accept. Now, the website was getting a lot of hits, wasn't it? How many did they say? I think it's on page 5. I can't remember. 7. I mean, that's a lot of hits. But the problem is that Martha wouldn't embrace the micro advisors. My first thing that I would do if I were looking at that is I would start taking some of these people and giving them weekly columns. I mean, that's the way that you can make this grow. And the problem, in essence, with the friends of Martha are the friends of Martha. So what's the one issue about this new guy? Yeah. I mean, he's a friend of Martha, and that's a difficulty, okay? He in his own way would be just as much of an issue, and whether or not he could lead to success, I would sure rather have Lisa Gersh, I'll say that much. So does anybody know how it ended?
Yes.
Martha Stewart sold out. She's no longer on the board, but she is a spokesperson. And I forgot who they sold out to, but she sold out 4 cents on the dollar. Okay, so now she's a millionaire. But, you know, Martha Stewart as an organization has turned around because, of course, the brand is so strong that it couldn't die. but Martha is no longer in the day-to-day operations, okay? So from this little kind of thing that we talked about, it kind of gives you an idea of what you'll be doing on your cases. This is a normal journal article. You can find it anywhere. But if you think and really perceive when you look at these things, you yourselves can cognitively figure these things out and come up with your own understandings just by doing a little bit of reading, okay? When you do the big cases, you're going to be doing the same things that any good analyzing individual will do. You'll look at these things, you'll look at the pertinent facts, you'll pull them out into a SWOT analysis, and when you get those facts in front of you, many times the picture starts to coalesce. And so that's what I was hoping we could do today. All right, we're done. We will see you tomorrow. We'll be starting on the next chapter, and go have a good day.
I'm not